Hello, everybody, and welcome to Charts with Dan. We've got some box office stuff to cover. We've got addressing a story that I covered last week, some clarification that's come out since I ran last week's episode, plus looking at the streaming charts, everything we're usually covering here on Charts with Dan. I thank you for watching. Full disclosure, I usually record the shows on Mondays, but I'm recording the show on Sunday because we're doing some studio renovations here very soon, so we got to get those underway, so I'm filming a little bit earlier today, but I wanted to get into the weekend box office numbers. Plus, we're not really getting the actuals as much because studios aren't reporting them, so it's a good time to record a little bit early. But let's look at the top 5 for this past weekend, and as has been the case since it opened, Tenet is the number one movie in the country with $3.4 million reported over the past weekend. That's a drop around 25%. That's a better drop. I think that's maybe a little bit closer to what Warner Brothers is looking for, as they're hoping that Tenet is going to be a marathon runner and not a sprinter. Then at number 2, New Mutants with $1.1 million. Unhinged goes back up to 3. It was supplanted by Infidel last week. It's now back up to the number 3 spot. Then at number 4, we have the latest documentary following the smash global sensation K-pop band BTS. Break the Silence is there at number 4. And then at number 5, Disney reissued The Empire Strikes Back this past weekend. Officially, it had been playing theaters this summer, drive-ins, etc., just as a library title, but there was an official 40th anniversary reissuing of The Empire Strikes Back. It comes in 5th place at $908,000, just under $1 million. So we're seeing the return of some library titles. Theaters are awaiting new selections, and we're going to talk about that and a little bit of news about the financial health of the 2 biggest theater chains around in just a second. But let's look at where this leaves these movies right now as far as the 2020 charts go. Domestically, I talked about this last week. Tenet jumps over, if you count The Gentleman, on 2020's list. Because it was a split release, it came out in 2019 in some places, it came out in 2020 in other places. I count it as a 2020 release. Domestically, it jumps over The Gentleman, and then everything else pretty much stays the same, and we don't have anything on the horizon, really, that looks like it's going to break into this top 10. So the domestic box office, short of what Tenet is going to do in the next few weeks, is probably going to stay like this for the next little while. But let's look at what's going on worldwide, and there was a big change actually at the worldwide box office because Bad Boys for Life, which had been the number one worldwide global release for pretty much the entire year, was bumped down to number 2. China's The 800, and this is a one territory release pretty much. Now the number one film globally at the box office with $434 million. Bad Boys for Life scoots down there to number 2. Then we have Sonic the Hedgehog at 3. And then Tenet makes another move on the worldwide charts. It jumped over Doolittle. It now has $283.2 million versus Doolittle's $249 million. So we're seeing it moving up the charts a little bit, mostly from its international grosses. 40 million or so of that is the United States gross or North American gross. And then we have the bottom 10, Birds of Prey, Invisible Man, Onward, The Gentleman, and The Call of the Wild remained unchanged at 6 through 10. As I mentioned, we're probably not going to see a whole lot of change there unless Mulan really catches fire in the territories where it's opening. We're going to check on that in a minute. As a matter of fact, I do want to check on Tenet and Mulan in general because that's a question that's been bandied around, and we've talked about it here on the show, but Mulan specifically has a lot of question marks. But what is the status of these movies? Because last week I talked about the fact that, you know, the sort of shorthand for anything approaching an acceptable gross, particularly for one of these big budget movies, is double your budget. So Tenet had a $200 million gross. I'd mentioned that $400 million worldwide is where it needs to even be considered not a failure. The break-even point for that film is probably $500 million or higher. Many different reports. That's for it to break even. So where are we even in relation to that? Let's look at the status of Tenet. It had a budget, as I mentioned, of $205 million. Its domestic total, as of right now, $41.2 million. Warner Brothers wants that number up. They want more theaters open. They want more people going to the theaters that are playing the film. It was interesting. I was looking at Deadline broke down the movie by theater in their box office recap for the weekend, and I believe the top 3 theaters for Tenet were all California drive-ins. So it's getting some of that California business, but Warner Brothers is really hoping that New York and Los Angeles are able to safely open their theaters soon. there you go. As I mentioned, really the driver behind this is the international box office. The international box office is what is really driving Tenet, because that's where you see your gross. That's where you see most of your money. Now, the studio's getting a little bit less of that money, but you're going to want to probably double that if you're Warner Brothers. You want to double that. So that's the question. How do you get there? Is it through expanded release here in the United States domestically and North America, Canada, etc.? Is it through continuing to play it in worldwide markets where it has shown some ability to draw box office numbers? That's going to be the question. How does Warner Brothers get Tenet to profitability? Or is it going to be a case where their win is the fact that it was in theaters, that it was there for the people that wanted to go back, and that they're going to have to make their money back somehow, or come to terms with losing a little bit of money on Tenet? The jury is still very much out on Tenet. I do think when we look at the domestic numbers, I do think Warner Brothers wishes those numbers were higher, but it's still possible over the next many weeks, and the schedule, which we'll see in a second, has been cleared out ahead of it, even more so than it already was. Maybe it continues to play. We're just going to have to let this play out and see what happens. Now, looking at Mulan. Now, this is the tougher one, and this is actually something where I want to address something that came up last week. When we look at Mulan, similar budget, $200 million. Now, domestic total, we have no idea, because it's all a Disney Plus money. And we thought we might have some idea, but we don't, and we're going to take a look at those numbers. International total, again, in the markets in which Mulan is playing, the international total is $64.4 million. That includes China. And the looking at this past weekend, the numbers stayed on track for it to end with about $40 million in China. There's a flood of new releases that are beginning to open because there's a national holiday in China coming up this week. So Mulan has pretty much done most of what it's going to do in China already. So that's $64.4 million. For it to include the Chinese gross, not good for Disney. Not good. And we've talked about this. Not good. However, the big question is, what has it been doing on VOD? Now, on last week's show, I spoke about a report from Yahoo Finance, who took some analytics from a firm called Seven Park, and through their computations, etc., had estimated that Mulan could have made up to $250 million from its initial release with the $30 premium video on demand on Disney+. However, one of the people behind Seven Park went public in the last week and disputed those numbers and put their own numbers into context. This is what he had to say. This is Brian Lichtenberger with Seven Park, who said that the real fault in Yahoo's story was that they estimated the audience size as Disney Plus's total audience size, whereas their estimates would sample the audience more towards how many people actually used Disney Plus in the time that was allotted. So they ran their own numbers there to sample the audience. And looking at the trends, looking at everything else, Brian Lichtenberger from Seven Park estimated a range closer to $60 to $90 million. That's not $250 million. And trust me, I saw the comments. I heard from a lot of you saying, like, how could you run this report? How could you run this report? Listen, when you're covering box office, so much of what you're doing is relying on the numbers that are run or reported by other people and trying to figure that out. And that's why last week when I reported the story, I tried to put it in the context of this is Yahoo's best guess based on the numbers that they have. Now, it turned out Yahoo had perhaps misconstrued or vastly overestimated how to sample the audience size on Disney Plus, and I'm glad that we had Seven Park come out and clarify this number, because that does put it into much more context. So I thought it was very important to clarify what Seven Park had come out and said, but the bigger overall point being, we don't know. Even Seven Park doesn't know. Seven Park's estimates are based on what they think it might have made. There have been nameless reports floating around that it was on the lower end of that it may have been closer to $60 million. That $60 to $90 million range is where, reports have come in about what it is. But the fact of the matter is that we don't know. We do not know what's going on with Mulan, and we're not going to know until Disney does their financial disclosures. I was reading, I think that the next one that's due, I believe, from Disney is in early November, that we may get a bigger idea as to what Mulan did then. But there has been other news that came out after last week's show that does lead me to believe it may be on that lower side, which is that Black Widow pushed its release date from November to next May. It's actually going to open up a year later, a full year later than it had originally intended. That means that this year is going to be the first year in a very long time, I think over a decade, without a movie from the Marvel Cinematic Universe being released theatrically. That would seem to indicate that, if they'd had this runaway success with Mulan, and you would think that you would have even more success with an MCU film, that maybe they might have done the premium video on demand route. So when we look at the status of these two movies, if I was writing a status report, or if I was writing, diagnosing a patient, I would say with Tenet, Warner Brothers has committed to a marathon strategy. That's obviously what's happening. I would say that it's working pretty well internationally. It could be working better here domestically. But the big question is when and if the theaters open in these larger metropolitan areas, particularly New York and California, will there be a big surge of business to see Tenet, or will the people that wanted to see Tenet have gone to neighboring states, have gone to drive-ins, as there are some here in California where you can go see Tenet? Has that audience base been expended? I would say, it's a TBD. It's a continue monitoring for Tenet, and it really is regarding how theaters open here domestically and what it does internationally. And then with Mulan, we have to wait and see, because I'm not even the doctor in this case. Disney's the doctor, and they ain't sharing their diagnosis until they have to. But the prognosis is negative if you're looking internationally, largely because of the movie's relative failure in the Chinese market, which you would think Disney would think could maybe even be its number one market, surpassing the United States. So negative prognosis internationally for Mulan, kind of a wait and see for Disney. It could be great news. It could be mortally bad news. We just don't know. However, another status report I wanted to give is the theatrical market itself, because we saw some reschedulings. We saw some reschedulings this week. As a matter of fact, let's check what the 2020 schedule was. And we had some big shuffles in the last week or so. So this is something, again, this looks like looks like my multiplication tables when I was in elementary school, read everywhere. Not good news. We already had Death on the Nile, which was kind of the next big-ish movie that theaters were looking forward to. That was moved from October 23rd to December 18th. Then the big one, the kill shot, perhaps, Black Widow moving from its November 6th date to its date in early May 7th, 2021. Many people taking that to mean that Disney saw the results from Mulan and didn't like either the theatrical or the VOD marketplace. We don't know. So that leaves for November, pretty much right now, the only movies on the schedule being No Time to Die and Soul. And then the Christmas corridor also lost a big potential driver, Steven Spielberg's remake of West Side Story. It moved a complete year to next holiday season, to December 10th of 2021. So the Christmas marketplace is getting both more and less crowded. That one's so marked up and everything. I had to go back to the drawing board and make a brand new current select movie release schedule. So let's look at where the release schedule stands right now and take a picture of this, because my guess is there's going to be some red marks on this. Here is what we're looking at now. From now till November 20th, if you're a movie theater owner, there's not a lot of good news for you, because there's nothing really. There's a few smaller films, but the next big-ish release to come out is almost 2 months away, about 7 weeks away, which is the double shot of No Time to Die and Soul from Pixar. There has been rumbling that perhaps Soul could be going to Disney Plus in the way that Mulan did. We don't know that yet. We'll see if there is an announcement forthcoming, or if Mulan's performance might have changed that plan for Disney. But right now, there are 2 films scheduled for release on November 20th. Then on November 25th, The Croods: A New Age actually moved up. It was going to be more toward the Christmas season. It moved up to November 25th, to that Thanksgiving slot. So we have The Croods there. Then on December 11th, Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds is still scheduled. Then the 18th right now is a very popular date, because you have the sequel Coming to America there. It's currently still dated. Death on the Nile moved to that date to go up against Dune, and then Dune is there still on December 18th. Then a week later, Wonder Woman 1984 on Christmas Day, Escape Room 2 there at the end of the year, and then going into January, right now the 15th has 3 films currently scheduled: Mortal Kombat, the new remake of Mortal Kombat, Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway, which was pushed from this year, and Respect, which is a big Oscar film that was originally supposed to come out around Christmas and may still in limited release, but it is still set for its wide release date of January 15th, the Aretha Franklin biopic there. So that's the marketplace right now, and that summer all of that could move. But that's what theaters are looking at right now, and that's what makes a lot of this news that came out this past week about theater chains very troubling. We had the two big ones. We have AMC, the largest theater chain here in the United States, then Cineworld, the parent company of Regal, which is the largest theater chain in the world, both filing some pretty grim financial news. Let's look first at what AMC said. They have a deal in place. They're going to try to sell up to 15 million shares of stock to try to raise more money. Remember, they raised a lot of money earlier this year. And this is what they said in their filing with the SEC. Quote, "We currently estimate that unless theater attendance levels improve significantly from the third quarter of 2020 to the fourth quarter of 2020, that's this year, that's not next year, that's this year, and again into 2021, and we achieve levels of attendance approaching approximately 3/4 of normalized levels, we will continue to require additional sources of liquidity to meet our obligations as they become due, and our required amounts of additional liquidity may be significant." That is a number I haven't seen before from a theater chain. I haven't seen a theater chain give a number, but here we have AMC basically saying, we need people to start going to the movies, and we need people to start going to the movies now, and we need those theaters to be 75% full soon. Health-wise, I don't even know if that's a possibility, and I'm sure AMC doesn't know either. We don't even know if that's going to be allowed based on the regulations, based on if there is a surge in COVID-19 infections over the winter. Keeping in mind, this says into the fourth quarter of 2021, No Time to Die and Soul come out with only about 6 weeks left in the fourth quarter of 2021. So I think this is very telling that theater chains, particularly in this statement AMC, is really banking on, number one, that these movies come out at the end of this year, and number two, that a lot of people go out to see them. Because if not, they could once again find themselves in some serious financial troubles. And who can blame them? They've been shut down for 7 months at this point. Even though they've been open somewhat in some places with these new films, they haven't been blowing the doors off the box office. So that was a warning sign that I saw coming out from AMC. And then if you look at Cineworld, which is the parent company of Regal, they posted a $1.6 billion loss for the first half of 2020. So that doesn't even cover the last few months. Who knows, that's probably gone up. Hopefully not quite as bad because there have been some movies that have come out. But they say in their filing that they're encouraged by recent performance in the markets that were reopened, that they're looking forward. Again, we're looking forward to the movies that are coming out in 2020. Now, at the time that this filing was made, Black Widow was one of those movies. Black Widow and West Side Story are now no longer in that movie. So these are two of the films they were looking forward to, gone from 2020. But this is something they said as well. There can be no certainty as to the future impact of COVID-19 on the group. If governments were to strengthen restrictions on social gathering, which may therefore oblige us to close our estate again, or further push back movie releases, it would have a negative impact on our financial performance and likely require the need to raise additional liquidity. Should these movies get pushed out of winter, or at least out of the year, particularly No Time to Die, I think, would be the one, and Wonder Woman would be the two that perhaps could drive the most traffic. We could be looking at a serious possibility, unless there is some kind of a bailout or some kind of assistance given to these chains, of a major seismic, cataclysmic event in theatrical exhibition, not just in the United States, but worldwide, because yes, these companies are already, many of them, in debt. They've already raised a lot of money to get them to this point, and it was with the hopes that this would last maybe through the summer, and they'd have the second half of the year. When we're looking at these dates and we're looking at what's getting pushed and what's staying where it is, I think the thing that we really have to focus on is the fact that we are reaching a very critical point with these chains. And I know it seemed like we've been saying that since March, but it gets more and more real with every passing week. The financial situations of these chains are dire. And the more movies that see their release dates pushed, the more dire it gets for these theaters. So if I own a theater right now, I'm hoping, number one, that people are following guidelines, that they are doing what they can do to help stop the spread and the infection of COVID-19. I'm certainly, you're going to hope that cold and flu season, that there's not an uptick in these cases, because if there is another outbreak like we saw this summer, that could really be disastrous in a very real and permanent way for a lot of these chains. So something to watch. I don't want it to be all doom and gloom, but I mean, that is really that's kind of the point where we are right now for theatrical exhibition. Black Widow moving hurts a lot. People have shown up to MCU films consistently and in great numbers for the past several years. So to lose that into 2020 altogether, that's a big blow. And we will see if these chains are able to hold on, if they are able to get some sort of assistance. I think that they should be eligible for that kind of thing. I know that there are other industries that have gotten assistance in order to stay afloat. I don't think that a lot of the movie theater chains have. Do they have lobbyists? I don't know. There's so much going on right now. But 2020 began as a nightmare and is slowly turning into a continuing nightmare for theatrical exhibition. One thing that is continuing on is streaming and watching stuff at home. So let's see what people are watching at home, since a lot of people can't go to the theaters or may have already seen what's out. Let's start with Amazon. Antebellum remains the number one film on Amazon. That came out last week. Bill and Ted Face the Music, another 2020 release that would have been in theaters, is there at number 2. The Karate Kid 1984 continues its big resurgence, probably driven by Cobra Kai. Then we have Guest House and Rogue, 2 VOD releases there at 4 and 5. Halloween Town, which is a 1998 Disney original film starring Debbie Reynolds, is there at number 6. I don't really know why that one, but hey, 'tis the season. Then we have The King of Staten Island at number 7. Father of the Bride, 1991's Father of the Bride, saw a big resurgence this week, and I think it's because Netflix did a little reunion of the cast, so you're going to see that movie again. More people returning to see Father of the Bride. And then Black Panther and Trolls World Tour remain there at number 9 and 10. Let's see what people are watching on their Apple devices and elsewhere. Let's see what is top 10 on iTunes. Ava is the number one film. Now, Ava is a film that stars Jessica Chastain as an assassin. It's from director Tate Taylor, who did The Help and Get On Up and Ma. It's number one on iTunes at a pretty good rental price. It's about $7 to rent the movie, so I think that may be why it's there at number one, a 2020 movie at a good price. That's a great formula for iTunes. Then The Secret, Dare to Dream. We saw that earlier this year. The Outpost, Father of the Bride on iTunes as well as Amazon. Then Antebellum goes down to number 5. At number 6, we have The Last Starfighter, because why not? Then Alone, The King of Staten Island, Red Shoes and the Seven Dwarfs, which is a South Korean animated film from last year, is at number 9, because again, why not? And then at number 10, Irresistible from director Jon Stewart. But that's been on and off the charts for the last several weeks. And then let's see what people are watching over on Netflix. The number one film is Enola Holmes with Millie Bobby Brown. A lot of buzz around that movie. That's what people are watching, at least today. Then we have Real Steel with Hugh Jackman there at number 2. The Take drops down to number 3 from last week. Then The Smurfs 2, The Social Dilemma, The Devil All the Time with Tom Holland, which was on the chart last week. Pets United, Ryan Reynolds waiting. He's waiting to see if Free Guy is going to come out this Christmas, but right now people are watching him in Waiting at number 8, The Secret Life of Pets 2 at number 9, and The Croods there at number 10. Perhaps people prepping for The Croods 2, which is hitting theaters on Thanksgiving. So that's all the box office news I've got for you. It's so weird. We've been in such stops and starts. I mean, it seemed like it was kind of breathless reporting there. It was like the old times for a couple weeks there when New Mutants and Unhinged and Tenet and Mulan were all coming out. But now we are right back into a wait and see method. We by all accounts, we should be gearing up for Wonder Woman 1984 to hit theaters, but that's just not what's happening. So we're back into wait and see mode. We're back into watching these films and how they do and how they hold up. And a lot of theaters are waiting to see when the big cities, the bigger, particularly, again, like I said, New York and LA are going to be opening up. That's the wait and see method if you're a big theater chain right now. Thank you so much for watching the show. If you want to see even more of what I'm doing, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. And I want to thank some of my producer level patrons who have been so amazing, especially, like I said, it's at a time when movie news and box office news and reviews and everything else, it's all off kilter, but they have shown a lot of faith in me, and we're having a great time over there doing commentaries and Dan's monthly movie club, watch-alongs, which we just added, behind-the-scenes videos, Schmodown commentaries. There's all kinds of fun stuff over on Patreon that I'm doing. I would love to have you join me over there. Also, please don't forget to check out my new podcast, All My Movies, which I'm doing in conjunction with my friends over at the Schmodown Entertainment Network. You can catch it on YouTube over on SEN on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific time. You can also catch the podcast, the audio version, on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, anywhere where you can find podcasts, you can find All My Movies. It's been such a great show. We've gotten 2 episodes down so far. I did The Dark Knight and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. My favorite episode so far is premiering this week. I get to talk E.T., the Extraterrestrial, with one of the stars of the film, Dee Wallace, who plays Mary, Elliot's mom and the kid's mom. It's such a great conversation, and it was really fun to cover the movie. That movie unlocks a lot of memories for me, and that's a lot of what the show is about. So please don't forget to check out All My Movies, and please come back next time for more box office news. I'm also going to be trying to throw in some reviews, and as I said, pardon my dust here for the next couple weeks because we're going to be doing some studio renovations, so you may see some changes on what you see behind me because we're looking to improve some things, and a lot of it just, you got to break things down to build them up. So thank you for your patience in advance on that, and thank you for watching the show. I'll see you next time.